Distinguished experts, ladies and gentlemen, as our virtual room is filling up for this roundtable, let me start with a warm welcome to all of you. My name is Elisabeth Türk. I'm the Director of the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division at UNECE, and it's my great pleasure to moderate this roundtable on fostering circularity in food trade. At the 69th session of the UNECE Commission, our member states, they committed to stepping up efforts to promote circular economy approaches and the sustainable use of natural resources by mainstreaming circularity and the sustainable use of natural resources in the existing relevant UNECE work streams. And at the Secretariat, we are putting that now into action, and today's roundtable, which is held as a UNECE UNDA project on accelerating the transition towards a circular economy in the UNECE region. Today's roundtable is part of these efforts, and it's part of our effort to support our member states in the transition to a more circular economy. And here at the beginning, I would like to thank our partners, UNCTAD and UNFSS, for co-hosting today's roundtable. Now, trade might not be the first thing people think about when talking about a circular economy. And agriculture might not be either. In fact, when talking circular economy, most people usually think about waste. And while waste is a really important central concept for circularity, in the end, circular economy is much more than waste. And it's therefore critical that the discussion is not limited to environmental ministries, but that it's a much broader discussion that allows us to explore how different policy areas can contribute to the transition to a circular and more resource-efficient economy. And I guess today we will hear more about that, about the transition to circularity, and that it will require rethinking agriculture and food value chains, not only at the production stage, but also at the trading and retail stages. Both agriculture and trade policies have important roles to play in facilitating the transition to a more circular economy. Now, at the Economic Cooperation and Trade Division, one of our core work programs is the work program on agricultural quality standards, also labeled commercial marketing standards, and these standards help facilitate trade in agricultural produce. And as one of our longest standing bodies, the UNECE Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standard is meeting these days for its 76th session. And today's roundtable is held at the sidelines of this Working Party meeting. And I hope that we are welcoming some of the experts from the Working Party to discuss also with us here today. We are delighted to have an exciting panel of experts and representatives with us here today. And before we really go into the depths of the discussions, I invite everybody to have a look at the chat, where we are conveying to you the housekeeping remarks. And maybe very importantly here is that we're very pleased to offer simultaneous interpretation in both Russian and French. And so you can choose the language just by clicking on the respective button. Now, with that, and having seen that the room is nicely filled up, let me slowly transition to the real debate, and it's my great pleasure to welcome our opening speaker, Ms. Olga Algayerova, Executive Secretary of UNECE. And many thanks, Olga, for being with us. It's really under your sort of like strategic vision and guidance that in UNECE we are working on circular economy together with our member states. So I'm particularly pleased that you join us for today's roundtable. And with that, Olga, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Dear participants, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this roundtable on circular economy. Today, with specific focus on fostering circularity in food trade. And I'm very pleased and grateful to Elizabeth and her team and all the experts working on this topic, because circular economy as such is very close to my heart. So let's come a little bit into the short history. In April this year, UNECE member states, all 56, committed to step up efforts to promote circular economy approaches and the sustainable use of natural resources. And In that meeting, at our Commission session, they emphasized the strength of UNEC as a platform for inclusive dialogue with the ambition to help them to achieve a double-digit circularity in our region, and decided to mainstream circularity and the sustainable use of natural resources in existing relevant UNEC work. So now, at the UNEC Secretariat, we are putting that decision into action, working to support our membership in identifying how circular economy approaches and sustainable use of natural resources can be integrated throughout our work, including the work of UNEC committees, working groups, and other many subsidiary bodies. So this roundtable is held on the sidelines of the 76th session of the UNEC Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standards, and congratulations to such anniversary. The aim today is to provide a space for inclusive dialogue to explore the links between circular economy and agri-food production, trade and standards, including in relation to food loss and waste, what is very important. What does a circular economy and sustainable use of natural resources imply, and what does it mean for agriculture and food value chains? A circular economy is based on the principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping products and materials in use, and regenerating natural systems. It's about using systems thinking to identify how we can use resources as efficiently as possible and generate the least amount of waste. And specifically in agricultural sector, it involves minimizing the use of external inputs into production processes, closing nutrient loops, reducing negative discharges to the environment, such as waste, greenhouse gas emissions, and nutrient runoffs, minimizing food loss and waste, and reusing crop residues and food waste. Now the question is, how can we at the UNEC Secretariat support our member states in the transition to more circular and resource-efficient economies? What role can trade instruments, including commercial standards, play in supporting this transition? These are some of the questions we are seeking to answer today. The aim of this roundtable is to kick off the exploration of what a circular economy and sustainable use of natural resources would mean for the agriculture and food sectors, and thus for food trade. It provides a first instance to consider what role trade instruments such as standards can play in facilitating a move to more circular and resource-efficient practices in agri-food supply chains, and I'm pretty sure that it can play an important role. As mentioned, one key area of circularity is food loss and waste. This is an area we have been focusing on at UNEC over the past few years. Under the guidance of the Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standards, our recent work has included the following. First, development of a code of good practice for reducing food loss in handling fruit and vegetables, to identify measures to reduce food loss in fresh fruit and vegetable value chains up to and including retail. Second, a food loss and waste measuring methodology for fresh produce supply chains. Third, minimum quality specifications for fresh fruit and vegetables. And the fourth, the digital blockchain-powered feed-up at UN solution for identifying, quantifying, and tracing food loss in supply chains. And just 2 weeks ago, we launched a multi-year project on accelerating the transition towards a circular economy in the UNEC region that is financed by the UN Development Account during the years 2021 till 24. One of the 3 focus areas of this project is management of waste, including food waste and loss reduction. So more will come on this topic. Today's event is one of the first in a series of activities held under that project. The discussion will provide input to the preparation of related policy briefs. The discussion may also inform deliberations in both the Working Party on Agricultural Quality Standards and the Steering Committee on Trade Capacity and Standards in spring 2022. So I'm really delighted to see such an eminent panel of experts with us here today, with the breadth and depth of your knowledge that is represented here. I'm sure we will have a very interesting and inspiring discussion. We will explore together what circularity and resource efficiency mean and how they may impact agri-food value chains and what role standards can play in facilitating the transition to more circular and resource-efficient economies. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to inform that today's discussion is a part of a larger program of circularity-related discussions. In November, several working parties and teams of specialists will look at how the respective work streams can contribute to a more circular economy transition. We look forward to working with UNEC member states in identifying how, within existing mandates, of course, we can best support them on the journey towards a more circular economy and a more sustainable use of natural resources. So back to you, Elizabeth, and thank you all for your kind attention.
Many thanks, Olga, for this really inspiring opening remarks. And you already really dived into the substance. You provided context of why we are holding today's meeting and sort of under which project. You've raised some of the tricky questions we'll be discussing, and many thanks also for flagging UNECE tools that we are really working hard on, both in the trade field and beyond, in the normative field, but also in technical assistance and capacity. And Olga, thank you for being with us and the team in this regard. So with that, we transition to the debate, and we have an exciting list of speakers. And when we look at the agenda, first some sort of like background presentation and then a wonderful lineup of speakers. It was important for us really to have the different stakeholders with us here today, and I'm very pleased to have key IGO partners. We have OECD, FAO, UNCTAD and UNFSS, so thank you for our IGO partners to be with us here today. I'm really delighted that we can welcome key think tanks like Ellen MacArthur Foundation and also the Institute for International and Environmental European Policy. Thank you to experts for being with us, and also for Ellen MacArthur. You've really joined us on many similar occasions in the past weeks. It's delightful for us to also welcome the private sector. We will have a contribution from a Swedish company, and last but not least also academia. And very importantly for UNECE, to also welcome our member states. And here, special thank you to colleagues from Turkey, from the Turkish Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, to be with us here today. So with this, let me now give the floor to our first speaker. And my great pleasure to welcome Ms. Gaëlle Legelin, who is design manager at the Food Initiative at Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And as I mentioned, Ellen MacArthur is really one of the leading think tanks on circularity. And Gaëlle, you will be presenting to us the findings of a very recent report. I think it's called The Big Food Redesign. And you launched this report in September earlier this year. So with that, Gaëlle, there are lots of interesting questions lined up for you. For example, what if food could help tackle climate change? Very topical today. What if food can help us build biodiversity? And I guess you'll be sharing some of the questions and some of the answers on these important topics. So with that, Gaëlle, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Yeah, I mean, as we all know, food is a vital topic. If we fail on food, we won't be able to reach our climate targets. So what that also means, and the positive side, is that food can and needs to be huge part of the solution. And really, I want to focus today on solutions. So I'm going to start by taking you on a little trip to the future. Let me share my screen and try to imagine what, we're stepping into a supermarket in 2030. What products could we find there? And a first one would be maybe Silvo. It's a line of dairy and walnut cheeses. And these cheeses come from silvopasture. What that means is that the cows are grazing around the walnut trees, fertilizing the soil, and then in turn the walnut trees provide shade, provide shelter, and they sequester carbon. The farmers that produce Silvo have diversified their income, and farms like this, they don't rely on the price of milk alone. Sorry. Somebody is not muted. I'll just continue. And farms like this could also reduce their greenhouse gas emission by 90%. In 2030, if we look at the breakfast aisle, we could see breakfast cereals like Climate Crunch. And what's special about Climate Crunch is that it's made of a blend of wheat and peas that are mixed in the same proportion that they're grown in the field. So what happens is, if instead of growing the wheat in monoculture, you intercrop the wheat and the peas fix the nitrogen in the soil, nourishing the wheat and lowering the need for synthetic inputs. So if you add this very simple protein-packed ingredient, you could reach a decrease of 50% in biodiversity loss, and you can increase the amount of food that you're producing on that same land by 50%. And at the same time, you're improving farms' profitability and resilience because of the sheer diversity of crops that exist on that field. And finally, you could maybe, if you're up for some treat, you would want some cookies. And this box of cookies called Sweet Up is made entirely from ingredients that otherwise would have been wasted. And it's called upcycling. You probably heard about it. So in this one, the flour would be made from coffee cherries. So coffee cherry is a part of the coffee crop that usually is left to rot in the field and produces a lot of methane. But we can use it for flour. And they are sweetened with cocoa fruit pulp, which is also a part of the fruit that we usually discard. And upcycling is wonderful because on top of preventing food waste and food loss, if instead of throwing half of the crop away, if you're using that to produce food, you're essentially doubling the value of the input that came into growing that food in the first place. So for example, water, soil, human labor, you're doubling the value of this input by using all of the crop. So what all these products have in common is that they were designed around what nature needs to thrive. The ecosystems and the interdependence of ingredients have been taken into account when these products were designed. And because their ingredients are diverse, they have lower impact, some of them are upcycled, and all of them are regeneratively produced, these products can help tackle climate change and build biodiversity. And this is circular design for food. And it has the power to move the food system from today being responsible for 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions, as we know, to a food system that would be nature positive by design, that would regenerate more than it degrades. So why is circular design for food so powerful? It's quite simple, actually. If you think about it, farmers work to meet the supply demand created by the big food brands and the retailers. So the choice that these companies made, the choice of ingredients that they will put in a product, not only affect the taste and the look of that product, but also shape the agricultural landscapes. And today, 60% of what we eat come from 4 crops. Out of the hundreds of thousands of crops, edible crops in the world, 4 crops. And what that signals to the farmer is that's what they should be growing mainly, because that's where the demand is. And that's why in Europe and in the US, a lot of our countryside looks like the left side on that picture. So it's big monoculture fields that we see mostly. The right side of the picture shows you what a regenerative landscape would look like. And you can see it's a lot more ingredients. Maybe you have different varieties of wheat. Maybe you have intercropped wheat and peas. Maybe cattle is grazing on the remaining grass after the harvest. Maybe mustard is planted as a cover crop to protect the soil. And really, if you want to feel the benefits of these practices, you should go and touch the soil in these different fields. On the left side, the soil is going to be quite gray, it's going to be friable, it's not going to smell much. And on the right side, it's darker, it's humid, it smells a bit like a forest in autumn, and you have a lot of worms wiggling out of it. And if you listen, the left one will be quite silent, and the right field is going to be buzzing with birds and insects and animals. And that's where we want to go. If we want this farm to be profitable, companies focusing on sourcing their current ingredient better is not going to be enough, because we need to create the demand for this much wider mix of livestock and crops, and they need to be designed in the products. So in essence, what we're saying is, rather than bending nature to produce food, food can be designed for nature to thrive. How do we get there? Well, the good news is it's not only possible, but it can scale massively and rapidly. First, it's important to see that in the UK and the EU alone, the 10 leading food businesses influence 40% of the agricultural land. So if these 10 businesses harness circular design for food, they could flood our supermarkets with incredibly rich and incredibly diverse products that are good for farmers, good for businesses, and good for the soil. And guess what? Consumers want it. I mean, we're all consumers, and we know we want to be given more nature-friendly choices. And what we've seen also is the economics work for farmers. So after a transition period, and if they're given the right support, so new buying model, the right subsidies, new contract terms, then they can make it work. They will increase their profitability. They will diversify their income, increase the resilience of their farm to climate shocks, to pests and diseases through the sheer diversity. And they will also increase the amount of food produced on their land. And, you know, for the policymakers, you also have a huge role to play, because today the incentives are stacked against that vision. Most incentives support conventional agriculture. So we need to switch to a system where regenerative outcomes are rewarded. And I really emphasize the word outcomes. Regenerative practices look different everywhere. You know, what is good in a context in the south of France is not the same as what it will be good in Turkey, for example. So we really want to focus on outcomes, that the outcomes are rewarded. So we need to switch to a system where these outcomes are rewarded, where the farmers are supported through subsidies, financially, knowledge sharing, technical support as well, so that, because they are the key actors in that transformation, and a system where research and innovation would be harnessed to create new market opportunities, and where entire governments and different countries would collaborate to create a global push for change. And trade is also a very powerful tool for governments to push towards this nature positive food system. It could look like, for example, having a sustainable food chapter in every trade agreement, with definitions that would be aligned with circular design for food. So it would be ingredients that are diverse, that have a lower impact, that are upcycled, and all around regeneratively produced. So I really want you to understand that circular design for food is a solution that goes beyond the agricultural and the food system alone. It's not an add-on. It will, if harnessed properly, help governments and businesses achieve their climate and biodiversity goal. So I want you to think for a minute. What if your breakfast could tackle climate change? What if your lunch that you're hopefully having at the minute, what if this lunch could help build biodiversity? And what if companies designed food for nature to thrive, for soil to be replenished, and for water and air quality to be improved? To build this, we need to change the way we look at the food system. And we need to stop thinking, let's do a bit less bad, and start realizing that it can be a fantastic positive force of regeneration. And I will stop here and see if there are questions.
Many thanks, Gail. That was fascinating, and it surely will sort of like make us taste our lunch or lunch pack differently right now, as we are in Europe in lunch break time. But I guess sort of the key message really is like that it's not about bending nature for food, but it's about designing food for nature to thrive. And that's a really, really inspiring slogan. And you've also given us some suggestions already what private sector and policymakers can do, and also pointed to the important role of trade, including trade agreements. So you're really in the depth of the discussion already. And thank you, Gail, for setting the context. And thank you to Ellen MacArthur also for the amazing work you are doing here. So given we have this sort of like long list of speakers, let me turn immediately in line with our timing schedule to the speakers, the panelists. And I guess we've scheduled for 5 to 6 minutes for each of them. And we'll continue with a representative from academia. And it's my great pleasure to invite to the floor, to the panel, Mr. Shane Ward, who is Professor of Biosystems Engineering at the University College Dublin. And I think, Shane, you also will have some slides for us to share. I understand you're a leader of a project called AgroCycle, and there you're really looking at the application of circular economy across the agri-food sector. And I guess you'll also be looking at like recycling and valorization of agri-food waste. And Shane, if you can tell us a bit about like what are the critical levels, what are the drivers for increasing circularity in agri-food? And again, similar to Gail, what's the role policy can play in that? So with that, Shane, I would give the floor to you, and let's see whether we can not only see the slides, but also see and listen to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm very pleased to get the opportunity to present our perspective on both efficient food production and also the concept of sustainability and circularity. I presume everybody can see my presentation? Yes. There are two key messages here. The first is that global trade as a key enabler of efficient food production. I say that because global trade enables the production and supply of food from the most efficient sources, I mean areas, countries, zones, and also at the scale necessary to meet global demand. The second point is that when looking at food, you should look not just at the food, but also at the resources that are used in its production. And these must be replenished. So food is not just food, it's food plus the resources that were used. And this particular link between the food and the resources is not fully appreciated and is critical to the whole concept of circularity and sustainability. So, some brief starting points. Feeding the world is a challenge, but it is perfectly feasible. The population has tripled since World War II. 2.5 billion then, 7.5 billion now, and growing. That's an amazing statistic. Dietary requirements and expectations are changing rapidly towards what one might call a cosmopolitan diet. That is also very significant when coupled with the population growth. You cannot feed the world without global trade. That is a simple fact. Food should be grown as efficiently and sustainably as possible. You must support the most efficient and sustainable producers. That is to match the country, the region, the zone to the efficiency and sustainability of the food production system. Policy and economics must support, not penalize, efficiency and sustainable production. You can use global trade to bring efficiently produced food to market. And carbon emissions are a global issue. They are not a regional issue. So now going back to, so those are just sort of some starting points. Looking at the circular economy, First point here is that the circular economy is primarily about resource use efficiency. That might seem a bit strange, but that is fundamental. It is not just about cycling resources. The starting point is to use fewer resources in the first instance. So system efficiency is fundamental. You cannot assume that if a waste is used, then the system is in some way more sustainable. In fact, it might be less sustainable. So a circular efficiency approach is needed, whereby upstream inputs are minimized. So you use technologies such as precision agriculture, looking at soils, soil health, sustainable soil management, look at the overall technological capabilities, the farming practices, etc. On the one hand, so that's in the production, as it were, and the downstream residues or byproducts, manures, crop residues, that these are circulated. A key point is that you must avoid what's referred to as the Jevons paradox. A simple example is creating a market for waste runs the risk of generating more waste. So global trade in both food and indeed feed and back trade in input resources is required to achieve a reasonable level of sustainability. On the risk side, of course, there are issues about global trade, such as supply chain integrity, food safety, politicizing food, and many other considerations. Regulation is a powerful and necessary tool to support sustainable systems. So key points are, global trade in food is essential to ensure the scale and variety necessary to meet the exponential rise in global demand for food. Local food production cannot meet this demand. Global trade is a key enabler of efficient food production and circularity. There is a limited land base and input resources, for example, phosphorus, for food production. So the future is a hybrid local global food market, with global the dominant and local and global resource recycling loops. Market and regulatory systems should incentivize global trade in produce from countries or zones that are the most efficient producers. That is, those in the upper echelons of production efficiency, sustainability, quality, and safety. And this final slide just encapsulates a complete agri-food chain system, and it comes from our Horizon 2020 project, AgroCycle, that we led. Depicts the farm, the production of food here on the farm, the processing sector, retail, bioeconomy built on that. The key point here is that within that zone here, operations should be as efficient as possible. Operations on the farm, the processing, the handling of the chain. And then, assuming efficiency, you can now go ahead and use the byproducts of this system, the wastes, unavoidable wastes, use those to fuel a bioeconomy. In other words, they are the feedstock for a bioeconomy. The key to this, though, is the citizen. It is every one of us. We are the enablers of this. We are the people who set the demand. And a key element here, if I speak for one moment, is about supply contracts. Supply contracts between producers, the farmer, for example, and processors, or between the processors and the retailers, or between the farmer and directly to the retailer, are critical. But those supply contracts are actually dictated not by the industry, they are dictated by demand from the citizen. So there's a real issue here. The efficiency of this is in our own hands, and the markets respond to the demand that exists within the citizens of the world. So in summary, the critical levers for a circular economy are efficiency, consumer education, because as I said, the consumer, the citizen, is the key enabler of all of this. And while a consumer may be educated, they may not do what's right. So incentives to ensure that the systems are operating as efficiently as possible. Societal responses are important. So the consumer is one thing, but one must be very careful to avoid what I describe as herd instincts, and there are a lot of those around. You must avoid the Jevons paradox. Corporate social responsibility is a very powerful tool that's gathering momentum, and it can complement a well-structured societal response to issues around food waste and circularity. Policy, critical. The old saying that the pen is mightier than the sword applies here, and from good policy comes regulation that hopefully will work. But the key point here is that policy must be well informed. The corollary of that is poor policy that causes more damage than good. So it's critical that policy is properly informed. That's it. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Shane, for these very clear messages throughout the presentation. And also here, I'm not going to summarize the critical levers for circular economy. You've really set that out nicely. Maybe in addition to trade and policy, just flag that it's really for all of us, the citizens and the consumers, to also engage in that. So I think that's a very empowering and encouraging message for all of this. So many thanks to Shane for now, and let us move to our third panelist. And here I'm turning to OECD, and I'd really like to start by thanking OECD for the wonderful cooperation on trade and agricultural policy issues. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome Céline Giner. And Céline, you're joining us from the Trade and Agricultural Directorate and from the Agri-Food Trade and Markets Division. And I understand that in OECD, you also look at the interlinkages between sustainable agriculture and health. So that's interesting. And I guess you'll be telling us a little bit more about your work on food systems and how this links with circularity and resource efficiency. So many thanks, Céline. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and hello to everyone. So in April 2019, the OECD Trade and Agriculture Directorate organized a workshop on circular approach and the sustainability of the agri-food system. We asked participants to explain what a circular approach meant to them. And for many, developing a circular approach to agri-food systems meant taking sustainability issues into account. It meant, as just underlined by Shane, using existing natural resources in a more efficient manner. It also meant new opportunities for farmers, opportunities to increase farm income, and opportunities for rural development. So with this in mind, I'm very happy to participate to today's roundtable. And I will highlight some of the work we are conducting at the OECD and how it connects to circularity and resource efficiency. So I want to make 3 main points today. The first one is that repurposing agricultural support would foster more sustainable practices and efficient resource use. Second, we need to overcome some evidence gaps to develop more sustainable policies for food systems. And third, and Shane said that already, trade will remain essential. So ahead of the UN Food Systems Summit, we launched in January 2021 our report on making better policies for food systems. And we highlighted the triple challenge that food systems are facing. We need to feed a growing population. We want livelihoods for farmers and people working along food supply chains. And we want environmental sustainability. What have we learned from this work stream that relates directly to circularity? So my first point today is that repurposing ag support is needed to foster more sustainable practices. Our work showed that many agricultural policies are not effective at addressing the triple challenge, and they are often counterproductive. In fact, the vast majority of support to the ag sector does not go to investment in public goods, such as research and development, but is used to support incomes of individual farmers with negative environmental impacts. My second point is that we need to overcome evidence gaps to develop better and more sustainable policies for food systems. There are indeed important evidence gaps on facts, on the extent of the problem, on their causal mechanism, and also on the policies which are needed to be effective. In addition, we don't really understand how interest groups influence the policy process. And on the top of it, obstacles related to values are often neglected in policy making. Also, differences of our values are harder to resolve than disagreements on facts and interest. For example, the GMO debate or the new debate on cultured meat involve a stronger value component. So these different obstacles related to facts, interest, and values directly apply to the development of policies seeking to address the sustainability challenge. At the OECD, we are working on these evidence gaps related to the environmental impacts along food supply chains. We want to stress the importance of understanding environmental impacts all along the food supply chain and to provide an overview of empirical approaches to measure them. We are looking at the effectiveness of institutional approaches involving assurance schemes, standards, labeling, or disclosure mechanisms. My third and final point is that agro-food trade remains essential. Some people might think that local means more sustainable. Local food means more sustainable food, but we think that trade remains essential. Actually, transportation is only a small part of the environmental footprint of food systems. So what's really important is what consumers consume and how this food is produced. So at the OECD, we're working on trade and agriculture, how fruits and vegetables scheme collaborates with UN ECE on marketing standards for fruits and vegetables. And some of my colleagues are interested in the role of digital technologies to enhance agro-food trade. To conclude, the OECD work on food systems directly relates to circularity and resource efficiency. We are interested in the role of agricultural support in addressing evidence gaps on the environmental impacts of food supply chains and in agro-food trade facilitation. So I'm looking forward to further discussion today, and I thank you very much.
Many thanks, Celine, for being with us and for sharing this very clear three messages in terms of repurposing agri-support, filling the evidence gap, and the critical role of agro-food trade. And it's going to be a great pleasure to continue this cooperation. It's really always a pleasure to look at the wealth of analytical work that is being undertaken at the OECD. So many thanks for being with us. Now we'll do something slightly different. We'll turn to a speaker who unfortunately cannot be with us here today, but who has shared a video with us. So let's see whether I can put that challenge in the hand of the tech team to see whether we can display the video.
So Claes, welcome. You're the head of sustainability of Lantmännen, a cooperative that is owned and governed by 19,000 Swedish farmers, while operating as a fully commercial company, also operating several brands. So you have unique insights into the full food supply chain and understand what kind of transformation is possible, both at the level of farms and in other parts of the food supply chain. So at Lantmännen, you have recently issued a report called Farming of the Future, where you set out how to increase harvest by 50% by 2050, while reducing the climate impact of cultivation in line with the Paris Agreement, to, as you say, create a sustainable food chain from field to fork. Could you tell us a bit more about your findings in that report and how, in your view, agriculture can contribute to circularity and more sustainable use of natural resources?
Yes, thank you, Marit, for that introduction. First of all, I would like to start with that circularity is, I mean, it's very well integrated already in the food and the farming value chain, both on farm level where we use of course, the manure as a fertilizer and take care of all the residues on farm level and utilize it in different ways. And also going forward in the value chain, I mean, Lantmännen is operating within both food, feed, and the fuel energy markets. And of course, there are interactions between these value streams, and there are a lot of circularity already today. But of course, there is always room for improvements, and we have challenges going forward. Coming back to our report, we were mapping out the wide perspective of the challenges of the future, both the more environmental part with the climate, of course, and biodiversity and those challenges as it's linked to food production of today, but also the fact that we are having an increasing population globally, and we have more mouth to feed in the future. So we must also take care of the productivity, given also the fact that the farmland is a limited and a scarce resource globally. What we did was to see, okay, if we should take on these challenges from now until 2050, we need to see, okay, what kind of toolbox do we have? What are the potentials for the future? What kind of knowledge and techniques do we need to implement to reach this target? And how far do we reach if we do it all together at the same time and in a very good way? To summarize it a little bit, we can say there is mainly two parts in this. We have the input side, the farming inputs, and that needs to be more sustainable and circular. And there is a lots of inputs both from the energy side, but also on the plant nutrition side that is based on fossil resources today. So we need more sustainable and circular and renewable inputs to the farming. So that's one major part, and one other kind of headline is the management practices. We see that there is a lots of opportunities to improve the productivity on farm level by, for example, adapting new technologies when it comes to precision farming and best practice in the operations. So if we try to see, okay, how far do we reach when we use the best available technology in the best available way? And we see that we reach pretty far. We can improve both the productivity, but also the climate performance and the climate impact, and actually decrease the emissions in the pace that is stated by the Paris Agreement. So as one conclusion from our report is that there is not primarily a lack of technology or experiences or knowledge that is the bottleneck in this development. It's more of the lack of incentives on farm level. How can we create business models that supports the farmers to implement the best available technique and use all available potentials? If we can find that, that's probably something that is going to drive this, the sustainable development in a quite rapid pace forward, because we have lots of the technology and the knowledge available. So that's, I think, the main conclusions. We need support from both the market, the policymakers, and of course there are R&D needs as well. But we see that that support is needed to be able to do the investments necessary on farm level going forward towards 2050.
Great. That's really interesting and a very important point about the farm level. So coming very quickly to trade-related tools, since this is a seminar from the trade side, also looking at agri-food value chains. What role do you see for standards and related type of tools in driving the transformation, the incentives that you talk about?
I think this is a very important part of it, because competitiveness is, as I said, an important part of the transition. So of course we believe in free trade, and that's a strong supporter of free trade, but we see that it really needs to be also fair free trade. So you need to be able to compete on a level playing field. So in that context, of course, the standards and the trading tools are important. But we can also see that, I think, when it comes to standards, maybe we also need to increase the level of dynamics in the standard, that we need to have a more of a future-oriented development within the standards. We see that there are a strong trend within the food value chain, and also I would say in industry in total, going for science-based target today, for example. And that says that you need to improve in the pace that is enough to reach the Paris Agreement. And from that trend, I think we also need to develop standards that can support the implementation of that kind of approaches, that you need a much more dynamic and continuous improvement in a certain pace that also needs to be a part of the standard development going forward.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claes, for your insights. This is really, really interesting. Thanks a lot, and we will now move on to the next speakers.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you.
It was great to hear from the private sector, from Lantmännen and the major Swedish cooperative, and many thanks also to my colleague Marit Nilsson for introducing the discussion here. Now we continue with our set of live speakers, and it's great pleasure for me to now turn to another central think tank, namely the Institute for European Environmental Policy. So we are turning to Brussels, and we are going to welcome David Baldock. I see David with us, and David, you're a senior fellow on agriculture and land management program at the IEEP. And I understand IEEP has recently just produced a report about pathways towards a legislative framework for sustainable food systems in the EU. So I'm sure there is a lot of interesting information in this report, and please do tell us about some of the findings and some of the proposals. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for inviting me, and for a fascinating discussion. I'm going to talk for a minute about some of the direction of travel which I think we will see in the EU, and which we talk about a little bit in our report. And the first thing is the decision taken in the EU in the Green Deal to have a farm to fork strategy will lead potentially in 2023 to a sustainable food systems regulation. And that is meant to be one of the foundations for the whole farm to fork approach, to have something which is solid, which brings everything together. Why is this significant? Well, it will need to bring together a lot of important themes. Circular economy, we've rightly heard about today, that fits tightly with biodiversity, with climate, with resource efficiency. And perhaps what we haven't heard so much about this morning has been human health and sustainable diets. And in Europe, we do have a major problem with diet-related disease. We have a problem with obesity. We have a problem with diabetes. We also have issues with antibiotic use in agricultural production being at a level which is higher than we would like in terms of protecting its utility in medicine. So we need a way of bringing these different strands together to working in an integrated approach. And that will mean developing standards. And we've just heard from the farm level that we need a dynamic approach to standards. And I think that's exactly right. We need to have coherence between the different strands. And we also need to have vertical coherence. So that means it's when we are trying to work towards sustainable food systems, it needs to cover the whole spectrum from the farmer, the inputs to the farm, right through to the consumer end and to the waste and recycling management after the household. So we need to cover the entire food system. And that means it can't all be done at a high level of pan-European action. Some it needs to be done very much locally. So we need to coordinate local, regional activities with the national, with the international. And in our report, we suggest some ways that this law might actually work, what it could do. And I think the relevance today is that some of the things it could do will have an important impact on the circular economy and an important impact on trade in due course, because it will need to map out what the objectives are. You know, are we going to be asking companies, for example, to make sure that a certain proportion of their foods that they sell meets a sustainability standard? I suspect that is the direction of travel. Then we have to define what those sustainability standards are, and they might be mostly about products, but they also might be about processes, about systems in a lateral way. We'll need to have common definitions. We'll need to have some governance framework. We'll need to be able to combine the science with the economics, with the feasible, and with the culturally acceptable. Food is a particularly culturally sensitive issue. Not everyone wants to eat the same thing. We need the latitude as well as the progress towards scientifically underpinned goals. We need resources. And we need this to tie up ultimately with trade policy, in the sense that if the EU develops new standards, new systems, these need to be coherent with a trade policy that works for the rest of the world. And how is that going to work? If standards don't move together, then competitiveness interests issues arise, as we've heard before. So I think it means for organizations like OECD, UNECE, rightly thinking about these issues, how countries can work together to be aware of what their partners are doing, aware of what the implications will be, and ready to sort of plan ahead to be prepared for working together and avoiding unnecessary conflicts between different standards and managing those differences where they occur. So in the long run, perhaps we can imagine most countries moving towards an integrated food systems approach, because it is the way to bring the health dimension in together with the sustainability dimension, including the circular economy. It does need to be a systems approach, and that is much more difficult than just product by product approach. So I hope that this will be quite a fruitful area for UNECE to be working on, seeing that there's a lot of dynamics in this area, and I think a lot to watch in terms of how the EU develops its thinking over the next 2 years. And I'll leave it at that.
Many thanks, David, for joining us and for really also reminding us at the end now about the importance of this systems approach, and that there is a health dimension to all of these too. And indeed, we haven't yet looked at all at the health dimension of the circular economy in the initial thinking we are doing here. I very much enjoyed also how you referred to standards, the important role of standards and the connection between standards and trade. And I think that really goes to the core of work of UNECE. And I'm delighted to mention that next week, our Working Party on Regulatory Cooperation and Standardization will have its annual meeting and also slot in a discussion about circularity. So I do see already a connection between our different work streams here. And I understand it's a challenging topic to pick up and an important one. So we hope to partner with all the actors and benefit from their expertise in this regard. Many thanks, David. Now we are moving from Brussels to Geneva, and we are moving to UNCTAD, remaining on the topics of standards. And it's great pleasure for me to introduce a former colleague, Santiago Fernandez de Cordova, who is in UNCTAD's senior economist at UNCTAD, and he's also coordinating the United Nations Forum on Sustainability Standards, UNFSS. And here, a big thank you to UNCTAD and UNFSS for both co-hosting this event here today. So Santiago, you're really working a lot on sustainability standards, and I guess you'll be telling us a little bit what's the role of voluntary sustainability standards in the circular economy transition. And also, is there a role for governments to play in this regard? So with this, Santiago, the floor is yours.
And thank you, Elizabeth, for the kind introduction, and thank you for inviting us to be here in this very interesting roundtable. As you say, I'm in UNCTAD, and UNCTAD is the Secretariat of the United Nations Forum on Sustainability Standard, UNFSS. UNFSS is a UN platform working on voluntary sustainability standards as a market-based policy tool to achieve SDGs. UNFSS members, UN members, are FAO, ITC, UNEP, UNIDO, and UNCTAD. UNECE is a key partner of our platform. So to turn a bit to your questions and to try to answer your questions, I would like to address 3 issues. First of all, I would like to talk about VSS as a market reality, voluntary sustainability standards as a market reality today. Second, what is the role of VSS towards circular economy? And lastly, let me give you some of my thoughts with regards to the role of governments and with regards to the role of trade policy. I hope with these 3 comments, I can probably answer your questions. So to use sort of the words of Gael, instead of looking to the world in 2030, we can look at the world today and to see what is the reality with regards to voluntary sustainability standards. Voluntary sustainability standards today are a market reality. Voluntary sustainability standards have emerged as a market-based tool to address key sustainability challenges, such as environmental impacts of production, climate change, biodiversity, workers, and human rights. Today, we see, according to ITC standards maps, over 300 voluntary sustainability standards working along the supply chains. And we know from market research that today 60% of consumers are willing to pay a premium for sustainable products. And of course, I guess many of us, we are faced on a daily basis on these voluntary sustainability standards when we do our food shopping or when we do our shopping on a daily basis. And to a certain extent, this goes along all the supply chains. Now, our research shows that most of the voluntary sustainability standards, they're actually, they work or they affect along the agriculture products, in particular, all the agriculture products. And now this is quite interesting because obviously most of these agriculture products, they are produced in developing, emerging, and transition economies. That's why the importance of voluntary sustainability standards along the food value chain, the food supply chain. Now, if we can sort of see the characteristics, if we can talk about the characteristics of VSS, they're a seal of approval with regards to some type of sustainability metrics. They also provide market access. This is quite a fundamental aspect of voluntary sustainability standards, because if you comply with these standards, you're able to put your agricultural products in the shelves of the developed countries. They're also an efficient marketing tool, and sometimes, or most of the time, they can provide a premium price. I think many of the speakers before have also referred to the sort of certain difference about the standardization problem, standardization process with regards to either voluntary, regulatory, non-regulatory, private, non-private, and all the different aspects of standards that we can find, either process or product or quality oriented. So here we have a wide range of standardization process. And of course, what I'm trying to refer more in our presentation, in my presentation, is those voluntary sustainability standards, those label systems that we find at the end of the sort of supply chain of food products. Now, to turn to my second point, what is the role of VSS towards circular and resource efficient economies? And here, the key is to look at, of course, the objective, the criteria, and the design of both voluntary sustainability standards, and to a certain extent, the way that circular economy is defined. There's a large number of VSS, our evidence shows, are directly and indirectly supporting today already a circular economy transition. And of course, this is reflected in UNECE portal on standards for the SDGs, where you already mapped some VSS, including an overview on their alignment to issues relevant to circular economy. Now, when it comes to the characteristics, as we have probably heard from some of my previous speakers, most of VSS in agri-food sector have criteria that require management and use of natural resources with positive effects on better farm management and or reducing inputs. So already we see a lot of VSS which include these sort of elements in their design. We also see that VSS cover the aspects of minimizing the inputs required, or using organic inputs and maximizing productivity. This is already embedded in the design and the objectives of the voluntary sustainability standards. And many agricultural VSS encourage producers to minimize the use of chemical fertilizers and instead adopt techniques like making their own manure or using organic produced fertilizers. Hence, most VSS also have criteria that require recycling and reuse of resources. And here is a bit of the link of voluntary sustainability standards with regards to circular economy. And in essence, it's very much linked to the same sort of logic of circular economy and SDGs and VSS and SDGs. It's key and it's fundamental in the design part of voluntary sustainability standards. We have done a mapping exercise with ITC where we have looked at 232 VSS against including 800 VSS requirements and linking it to the targets, to the 55 targets of 16 SDGs. And we find a sort of matching exercise where we, again, find the coincidence, or we find the link with regards to the design of voluntary sustainability standards. Now, it has already been referred by Madame Algajerova, the importance of minimizing food losses, minimizing losses in the food supply chain. And here I want to introduce an element that is fundamental in voluntary sustainability standards, which is the concept of chain of custody, or chain of custody and traceability. We know that today 1/3 of the food produced are typically wasted along the supply chains. This provides increased pressure on agriculture, and of course, it affects the income stability of producers. Sometimes food loss can be the result of several circumstances, from the lack of best practice on farmers' part to not enough space on the cold chain storage facilities. And it is clear, and evidence shows, that finding efficient ways to track supply chains can reduce food losses and hence transition to circularity. And today we know that VSS certification systems can unlock the potentials of traceability, or what is understood as chain of custody, and minimizing losses along the food supply chain. I think it has been referred to some technological use of blockchain, and today we already see blockchain being linked as an instrument, as a traceability instrument of many voluntary sustainability standards. To conclude, Elizabeth, I think your question is extremely valid about what is the government action, what is the role of policymakers around the globe. I think we see a complementary tool between VSS and the public policies to achieve SDGs. And in our view, governments can increase the uptake of VSS through sustainable public procurement and through trade policies, which has been extremely raised by many of the other speakers. We see that there is a potential synergy between the circular economy and international trade. On one hand, circularity can open trade opportunities. And on the other hand, trade can help scale up circular economies from local to regional and global levels. And here I do want to say that it's not the panacea. There's some challenges as we move along the trade policy instruments, in particular to VSS. And there are many of the challenges that need to be faced by emerging producers, emerging economies, developing countries producers, and hence there's a need for lots of attention as we move along this kind of policy tools for those concerns from the producers in developing countries. But we do know that improving the environmental, social, and governance traceability and traceability of value chains is a priority to ensure sustainable value chains in the circular economy. And VSAs play a role as they can be a powerful driving force toward an increased uptake of circular economy concepts in production, trade, and consumption of goods and services. Let me conclude here, as I think I have referred to a couple of those issues that you mentioned in your opening question. Over to you, Elizabeth. Thanks.
Many thanks, Santiago, and for really addressing all the key issues one after the other. And I guess even if for some of us voluntary sustainability standards are not really in our mandate, it's important, as you mentioned, to realize that VSS are a market reality in the developed world, but also in the developing world and increasingly in countries with economies in transition. So it's really a question of fact check to realize that they are here. Also very much enjoyed what you said in terms of the role of VSS for the circular economy transition in the design part, in the food supply chain, and very interesting from UNECE perspective, the connection also to traceability. And I'm very proud here to say that we have a quite significant work stream on the traceability of products for the circular economy, and tracing at the moment focusing mostly on textiles, garments and footwear. But our work will expand and maybe also expand in areas related to food. And last but not least, the crucial role of governments, the interaction between public and private tools and the challenges we face, because indeed trade can be a lever for circular economy, but there are many challenges, particularly for countries with economies in transition. So thank you for being with us, Santiago. And now we've had really a series of very inspiring presentations on the bigger picture. We've talked the systems approach, we've talked trade, we've talked standards. And I think we've really sort of like tried to disentangle a little bit the many different topics that come into play here. And at this point, it's a great pleasure for me to now introduce our next speaker and two speakers, because we will be zooming into one specific angle. We will be zooming into the question of food loss. It's already been mentioned before, the question of food loss and waste, but it's a great pleasure for me to introduce now a colleague from FAO, Niray Akan. Thank you, Niray, for being with us. You're a national project coordinator, regional coordinator at the FAO. And I understand you have done quite some work on food loss and waste. And you have really worked on a particular project for Central Asia. And again, that's of great interest for UNECE, because we do have quite some work streams with Central Asia, with the so-called SPECA countries. And it's no coincidence that today the SPECA Working Group on Trade is meeting, and indeed questions of agri-trade and food loss are maybe also of relevance to them. So Niray, the floor is yours. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'd like to extend my greetings to you all. I'm very honored to be part of this roundtable today. So I may say that, as we all know, food loss and waste is a very sensitive issue today, as it is an issue of social, economic, and environment character. When we throw away our food, we are also wasting all the resources, water, energy, land, and labor required to grow, harvest, transport, store, process, and cook our food. This becomes more evident when the rapid population growth is taken into account, which is expected to exceed 9 billion by 2050, and the fact that food needs to be increased by 70%. So less food loss and waste would lead to more efficient land use and better water resource management with positive impacts on climate change and livelihoods. Reducing food loss waste can generate a triple win for food security, for the environment, and for the economy. Food loss waste remains a severe problem, not only in Central Asia, but in many countries in the world. In the worldwide, 690 million are hungry, with an addition of the 132 million under COVID-19, but still food continues to be lost and wasted. The recent Food Waste Index report 2021 by United Nations Environment Programme estimates that food waste from households, retail establishments, and the food service industry totals 931 million tons each year. As a problem, food loss waste found a place on the United Nations 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The third target under the SDG 12 calls to halve per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer levels, and to reduce food losses along production and supply chains by 2030. With an objective to improve the general impact through joint planning and implementation and efficient use of resources, FAO designed the global initiative on food and waste reduction, which is called Safe Food Initiative, with the aim of guiding and facilitating collaboration among all involved in the food loss waste reduction. Under the umbrella of the initiative, FAO is implementing a comprehensive food loss waste reduction program in the region. In the scope of Safe Food, in 2020, FAO launched a 2-year project on reduction of food loss waste in the Central Asian countries, Azerbaijan and Turkey. The project is funded by the Government of the Republic of Turkey under the FAO Turkey Partnership Program on Food and Agriculture. With the project, the working areas are to develop nation strategies and action plans, strengthen national capacities for food loss waste measurement and reporting systems, promote and enhance food recovery and redistribution networks, knowledge management, raise awareness and behavior change, collaboration and partnership development. As FAO, with the project, we have been conducting a series of activities such as organizing training programs, preparing technical guidelines, conducting field research on food loss waste, implementation of an education program, launch of communication and awareness campaigns. A comprehensive program against food loss waste should consider the entire system as a whole, determine its distinguishing dimensions, and set the relevant priorities. The national strategies to be developed under the project will propose an approach that closes the loop on food loss waste occurring during the food supply chain and will support the shift to a circular value chain. In this approach, food loss waste is prevented first, then rescued and recovered, and finally recycled, compost, so that resources invested in food production are secured and optimized. As for circular economy for food, a comprehensive program against food loss waste should consider the entire system as a whole, as I said before. A circular approach would divert food loss to waste to an economic productivity, such as transforming food loss waste into a new resource or as a raw material for other purposes, like animal feed, biogases, or as a substitute for plastic materials. Regarding the situation in the sub-region, I may say that the countries in the sub-region have been making progress in recognizing the importance of reduction of food loss waste. Because of insufficient waste management and lack of legal framework regarding prevention and reduction of food loss waste and relevant connected topics such as tax incentives, recovery or distribution of food loss waste, or otherwise returning to economy, circular economy principles are recognized and stated as priorities, but yet to be developed and applied. Regarding the actions on prevention and reduction food loss waste, I can say that Turkey has gained more and has a voice in these topics in its region, with the collaboration of the FAO, Turkey's first nation strategy document and action plan on food loss waste was developed and released on May 2020. I believe my colleague, Mr. Burçak, will talk about Turkey's strategy document and action plan in detail. So I may complete my works. I can have questions if any. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Miray, and indeed we will see whether we manage to do a round of questions subsequently, but great that you really zoomed into for us on food loss and also putting it in the bigger context that with the increasing population growth, that topic will be even more important than it already is. And I'm really excited to hear what FAO is doing with its Safe Food initiative, and also very interesting sort of like the application in Central Asia, and maybe there is opportunity for our tools, our FEEDUP at UN blockchain-enabled tool, or also our normative tools, so the code of good practice, to engage in this regard. Miray, you've already mentioned one particular member state and a specific strategy, so I will now turn to Mr. Burçak Yüksel. And Burçak, you are the acting head of monitoring and evaluation department in the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry of the Republic of Turkey. And it's great for me at UNECE to welcome one representative of our member states. And we've heard already from Miray that Turkey just adopted a very ambitious document, a national strategy document on prevention, reduction and monitoring of food loss and waste. And I guess you're very well placed to tell us more about that strategy, what it aims to do, and what do you see your role and government's role in all of this? The floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for giving the floor to me. I am very pleased to join you on this occasion. I will give you some brief information about reducing food loss and waste studies of Turkey today. As you mentioned, we as a Turkey are well aware that reduction of food loss and waste can make some affirmative contributions to the food and nutrition security, sustainable food systems, but also for the economy and environment due to greenhouse gas emissions and efficient use of natural resources. So efforts to reduction of food loss and waste can reduce pressure on land, climate, and the water. Republic of Turkey has brought the agenda food security and reducing food loss and waste issues for the last decades and made significant contribution and big effort to prevent management of food loss and waste at the national and regional level. In Turkey, public sector, especially Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, currently plays a pioneer role in reducing, preventing and management of food loss and waste at the national and regional level. Even though some private companies such as Greening and some civil society organizations take over active role in reducing food loss and waste, including food banking activities at the local and regional and national level. Republic of Turkey launched the campaign for preventing bread waste at national level in order to raise awareness on prevention of bread waste and prevent bread waste at the consumption stage, as well as promoting healthy bread consumption in 2013. Thanks to campaign conducted by Turkish Grain Board of the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, many loaves of bread were saved in 2013, and in 2014 the UN-FAO considered the campaign for preventing bread waste as the most comprehensive practice carried out through a public institution and declared it is an example good of practice around the world for reducing food loss and waste. Finally, in May 2020, Turkey launched Save Your Food campaign with the cooperation of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. FAO is also one of the most important partners to reduce food loss and waste, not only at national scale but also regional scale, especially for sub-regional for Central Asia. Save Your Food campaign aims are to combat against food loss and waste, both at national and international level, and to raise public awareness food losses and waste for all products, not only bread, but also vegetables and fresh vegetables and fruits. And the campaign aims to create a role model by extending good practices on food loss and waste implemented in the world, in Turkey and also other countries, and aims to support national zero waste projects implemented by Ministry of Environment, Urbanization and Climate Change. Our ministry and FAO have organized a series of events with the involvement and assistance of relevant stakeholders from academia, NGOs, private sector, public sector, etc., to contribute to planning and implementation of activities to be realized within the scope of campaign. Turkey also launched a national campaign, Make a Pledge to Break the Record, under a Save Your Food campaign, with the aim of increasing the level of awareness in combating food loss and waste. The national campaign made a public call to combat food loss and waste, and this initiative was extremely helpful in ensuring the ownership of Save Your Food campaign by the public. The Guinness World Record for the campaign with the most pledges in the world on environmental sustainability was broken, with over 800,000 pledge. Turkey, in cooperation with all countries and relevant stakeholders, aims to intensify efforts at regional, national, international levels to reduce and prevent food loss and waste. Within the campaign, and with the help of FAO, Turkey's national strategy documents on prevention, reduction, and monitoring of food loss and waste, and its action plan was prepared. The most important objective of the national strategy document is to ensure that action is taken to prevent food loss and waste through adoption of concrete solutions driving on the advice of concerned stakeholders and local perspectives. The strategy plan and its action plan covers 4 strategic goals. The first one is prevent and reduce food loss and waste. The second one, food recovery and redistribution for direct human consumption. The third one is converting former foodstuffs to animal feeds without competing with recovery and redistribution for direct human consumption. The last one is recycle food loss and waste. Our national strategy document and action plans covers reduce food waste reduce some precautions at the retail level by improving inventory management and tracking the shelf life of products, prevent and reduce food loss and waste at household level by improving food literacy for all age groups, improve, enhance, and monitor safe and nutritious food recovery and redistribution systems for direct human consumption, collect organic waste for composting facilities without competing with safe and nutritious food recovery and redistribution for the direct human consumption, energy recovery from organic waste, and raise awareness of the causes of the food loss and waste, and promote some solutions and training on prevention and reduction. Our national strategy document is and action plan is very comprehensive study to implement throughout the whole Turkey. So you can access the detailed information, our strategy and action plans from the www.gidanikori.com link. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Many thanks, Burçak, and for giving really comprehensive overview of all the activities you're doing in Turkey as part of this strategy. And I think it's very diverse things that you've mentioned, from the food bank to the campaign against bread waste. And so it really is a diversity of topics. And I guess one of the key things really is raising awareness. And you mentioned that several times. And I would hope that also today's event is an opportunity to raise awareness for all of us to address this important topic. So congratulations to Turkey, and also to the excellent partnership you're having here with FAO. Now, with this, many thanks to the speakers. We have run through our long list and a lot of very rich information. We do have a little bit of time for a second round of questions that I'd be delighted to pose to our speakers, maybe sort of in the same order, but it would be very important that we are short and concise in answering this. And in addition, I'd like to flag that in the chat and in the various communications, there are some specific questions. So maybe Gail and Celine, I see there are questions to Ellen MacArthur and OECD, and maybe you just want to flag briefly afterwards, one sentence, the question and like some of initial reply, so that we can also have the audience benefit from that. I also understand that we have some experts with us who would like to make a brief comment. So maybe let me start with a brief comment, and then we'll go through the speakers for very quick point on questions in the order we have them in the program. And for the comment, I understand we have with us Mr. Tamas Vatai. And Tamas, you're representing private sector, and you're ready to make a brief intervention. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and I would like to thank for this excellent panel discussion. I would like to provide some private sector solutions which help the implementation of sustainable development policies and the circular economy. Or to quote Gail from the panel, these products and services have been designed in a way so that nature can thrive. Just about our company, we are a private firm in Hungary, and we provide consultancy services to firms in public policy and trade issues. And we focus on our activities on firms which provide solutions, innovations, which help the implementation of sustainable development policies, circular economy, and the increase of resource efficiency. First is the Munch application that I would like to present to you, which has been developed by 4 university students in Hungary. So they are very young and successful with this application. It is a platform that enables restaurants, bakeries, shops, and hotels to sell or donate their own sold but high quality food at a discounted price, which means 40–70% price reduction. It is an application in Hungary which is as popular as that of McDonald's or that of Burger King. And you see, this is fully in line with the FAO Safe Food initiative. And there is an incentive here as well, of course. Mr. Ward was referring in the panel discussion the importance of having incentives. So here the price reduction of the food left in restaurants, for example, is the incentive for consumer to buy food on this application. Food which is, by the way, is left after lunchtime, so you can pick it up in the afternoon if you buy the food in this application. So this application is about food awareness, environmental awareness, and social awareness as well, because you can donate this food, for example, to homeless persons on the application. And how this service is working, the customer downloads the application or goes to the website of this company, and searches the appropriate food in the near distance, for example, when the consumer is located, and then chooses the product and pays a discounted price for that product. And then the customer can pick up the food personally in a given time range. So for example, you can order in the morning your lunch, and then you can pick it up, for example, after 3 o'clock when the restaurant is closing and there are some leftover food. This application was launched last year, so in 2020, and they have already 150 partners, so restaurants, bakeries, hotel chains, and retail business in Hungary, including the Starbucks and the biggest Hungarian bakery franchise company. They operate in 14 cities, and this year they introduced their application, one of our neighboring countries, so they are entered the foreign market as well within the EU. They have currently 100,000 application downloaders who saved 70,000 food packages, which means a prevention of 185 tons of CO2 emissions. So here you see as well the environmental awareness behind this application. The second one is that I would like to present you is a bacteria fertilizer used in agriculture called Filazonit, which consists of natural bacterium strains resulting from research and development of many decades. And this natural fertilizer is not the traditional chemical one, but it is made of a special mixture of bacteria, and it very positively affects the environment, the soil, and can also be safely used in organic farming. And it increases the humus content of soil, restore its structure, vitality. And here you see the incentives behind this product. So for example, farmers can achieve a yield increase compared to traditional fertilizers. They even calculated it is between 5 and 20% yield increase compared to traditional methods. And they can even substitute the traditional fertilizers in organic farming. Furthermore, it helps capture CO2 from the air, so it is mitigating the climate change effects as well. It reduces the pesticide use and less irrigation is needed by the use of this product. And Mr. Baldock was mentioning the importance of sustainable diet and health. So here we speak about a product which promotes healthy soil, and the healthy soil means healthy plants and healthy food and healthy people. And just very shortly, a third one, which is a patented feed additive. It's the Climate Savers feed. It decreases the methane emission of ruminants, so animals like cattle, goat, sheep, as much as by 60–70%. And it not just reduces the methane emissions from cows, but you can increase as well the yield. So if it is a cow which is giving milk, you can increase the milk production a day by 5 to 15 liters. Or if it is a cattle producing meat, you can increase the extra weight a day by 0.5 to 1.5 kilograms. So here you see as well the incentives behind the product is basically, it's a natural one, but it still increases the yield of production. And of course, it helps as well if there are certain incentives, like in the EU Common Agricultural Policy, which helps, organic farming and special products which are used in the framework of organic farming. And it's important, of course, that there are such incentives as well at country or, for example, at regional level. So I would like to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamás, for sharing some very concrete private sector business opportunities here, and particularly interesting also the first one developed in collaboration with academia. And basically using the platform economy and the app providing a platform. For us in UNECE, we've also looked at the platform economy in connection with circular economy, and we did that as part of our team of specialists in innovation competitiveness policies. So a nice interaction here as well. So thank you. Now we turn to our speakers. We have some 15 minutes plus minus 10 more rather than 15, and I would go by order of speakers and really invite you to be concise, either answering to a question in the chat, adding any comment what you found interesting, or maybe zooming into the trade issue once again. And let me start now with Gail from Ellen MacArthur. The floor is yours for a quick comment.
Great. It was so interesting to hear everyone. Quick comment maybe on trade, some things that I haven't mentioned that sparked when the other speakers were talking about it. I think one great way would be to map the potential contradictions and conflicts between trade policies and circular economy policies. So in that way, you could identify, future barriers or unintended consequences. So, for example, like looking at the subsidies for transition for farmers, or what is the definition of sustainable, and on standards, the objective is really to have a global understanding of what a sustainable food system is, and one of the speakers talked about it, but we really want to stress, and we do it in the report, the importance of having a shared set of metrics and performance indicators. So shared definitions, shared set of metrics and performance indicators on outcomes rather than practices. And I will stop here. There are so many things, so many other things to add, but please contact me directly if you have any question.
Super. 2 concrete action points, mapping conflicts and contradictions, not only synergies, conflicts and contradictions, and defining shared or coming up with shared definitions. Great. Now we had, after you, Gail, we had Sean from Dublin. Any quick remark you wish to share?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe I'll just briefly respond to Thomas's first point on the food issue, on selling the food onwards at a reduced price. In other words, food that will be potentially wasted. At face value, these systems seem like the panacea, but they are full of problems. At one level, they are creating a borderline Jevons paradox that I referred to. They are creating a market for a waste, what would have been a waste. Now, in effect, what's happening is the market is being segmented into those who pay the premium, those then who pay this reduced price. And what happens is people play that market. Some people are genuine, the food is very useful for them. In other words, it's a human, a basic need situation for some people. For others, it is not. And these systems have been on the go for years. And I think particularly in the UK, several major supermarkets use systems like that. And some of them had to pull out of it because it created a secondary market. The second point I would make is the cheaper food is as a percentage of your income, the greater the possibility of wastage, because you do not see that food as something that impacts on you from a financial perspective. So that's also hugely important. So I think the other thing is, psychologically, all of this has to do with the dynamics of the consumer. I'm no expert in this, but marketeers and psychologists understand the dynamics of these systems. And essentially, if you, for example, purchase a food product and you know that there's a utilization pathway for the waste for that food. So for example, if the waste food in your location is going to the local, I don't know, let's say incinerator, so energy is being produced by it, a lot of people will say, there's no problem in wasting that food because it's going to a good home, as it were, it's going to be used. But that is actually very, very wrong, because if you look at my very first slide, you cannot look on food as food per se. but it's food and the resources that are put into the production of that food. So I would say fundamentally, these type of, the tinkering with the market opens up a Pandora's box of other unintended consequences. They are very complex, need to be looked at very, very carefully, but in general, they're not a great idea. That's just my comment in general.
Many thanks. Great to have that interaction, and also like seeing some of the pitfalls and things that this Chevron paradoxon will stay with us for some further discussion. Now, let us move quickly to Celine, OECD, whether something you would like to share very briefly.
Yes, hello. I'd like to come back to David's point on the food and health aspects. So at the OECD, we're working on policies for encouraging healthier food choices, and I'm actually responsible for that stream of work. And we right now have a project on that's trying to build a common understanding of simplified nutritional food labeling schemes. So we want to learn from the current experience of many countries across the world at developing and implementing these schemes. And in particular, we're interested in the process of policy making, in the process of evaluating ex ante and ex post these type of schemes, and in minimizing trade implications. So that work should be published in the course of 2022. And we now want to explore how such learning can inform sustainability labeling initiatives. And another point, so there was something in the chat, so a question in the chat about ag support, and I've responded in the chat, and I have provided some links to our work on food systems. So feel free to have a look at our webpage and come back to me if you need any additional information. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Celine, and also for this sort of like call for further action and engagement. Now we turn briefly to David, whether David from IAEP would like to say something in conclusion.
Yes, thank you. We've had some interesting themes coming up, and thanks to Celine for mentioning the health work at OECD. I was reflecting on the whole issue of the metrics, and I think we all agree that we should try to have metrics which can be agreed internally and can be agreed internationally if we want. There are questions which I think were underlined very well about the huge proliferation of labels and voluntary schemes as well as mandatory schemes. So we are getting a world in which the number of different labels with different objectives is increasing, and whether it therefore makes sense to be pursuing a two-track approach where we have synthetic labels which bring together a basket of sub-labels and specific issues, and we can give a kind of overall sustainability score, a health score, something which consumers might be able to read relatively quickly. And then to accompany those, we have much more specialized labeling monitoring regimes which actually look at particular characteristics of a product or a system, where we can then be rather more precise and less ambiguous. So we then need building blocks for both of those regimes, the more specialist and the more synthetic, and yes, ideally cooperation around them. So I look forward to seeing what OECD has to say on that, and others as well.
Great. Again, further exchange, welcome. And Santiago, we move to you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I want to concentrate on two comments. First of all, DSS and of course, circular economy, we have seen the link is very much related to the way they're designed and their objectives, but the transmission mechanism is trade. So then again, we have to think about how it affects the trade concept. And here, the link is obviously through the supply chains. And on the other side of the supply chains of what we're talking on food security, there's a whole world of developing countries, emerging economies, transition economies, and farmers. So my point is that when we look at these instruments, these policy tools, we have to also take into account what are the challenges in this type of policies. And this brings me to the second point. Let it be a circular economy or VSS, there's a whole gap in the governance with regards to international trade. We all know about the link. We don't really know how it links into trade agreements. They're there. The reality is that it's being put into the trade agreements through various ways, matters directly, indirectly, and hence the role of the United Nations in increasing the transparency of the implications of these policy tools with regards to the developing countries' challenges. And I think here I would like to emphasize that there's need for transparency, there's need for data, there's need for science-based, that we are really putting together the right policy tools for those really valid developmental objectives of those of developing countries. Back over to you.
Thank you. Concrete challenges and concrete action points. And with that, let me turn to Miray.
Yes, Elizabeth, I'd like to say that I totally agree with the previous participants' comments. Regarding food loss and waste, I'd like to add that we have to fight on different fronts to solve the complex problem of food loss and waste and take to an integrated approach from farm to consumers. The reasons vary widely and can be sector specific. Therefore, every actor has a contribution to make, focusing on where it can have most influence. So individuals have the potential to have a big impact in preventing and reducing food waste, but first they must understand and be aware of the problem and its impacts. Creating awareness and improving understanding of causes and impacts of food loss and waste can be achieved through dissemination of information, outreach activities, and targeted media campaigns to inform different groups on environment, economic, and social consequences of food loss and waste, and promote sustainable environment practices and natural resources. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Miray. And our last speaker was Burçak, please.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I would like to add some points. Data collection and analysis with appropriate methods taking into consideration international and national policy documents, commitments, and standards is very important for us to reduce food loss and waste and for the circular approach. And also we ensure that any actions for addressing food waste or loss are directed towards the entire food chain. We should encourage innovation to reduce food loss and waste in the entire food chain. And also we should improve consumer education. In other words, food literacy about food waste and loss. And we should invest in improving infrastructure and storage facilities, particularly in developing countries and at national and regional level. Also, we should establish a closer linkage between international organizations and national partners, and especially for private sectors. Private sectors should be included all process. Thank you.
Many thanks, Burçak. And it's been a really rich discussion, and I'm very glad that it's not my task to summarize and to draw the conclusions and move this forward, but I'm extremely delighted to introduce our closing speaker for summary and closing remarks. And I think we have with us already, let me see whether we have with us Ms. Teresa Moreira, who is the head of the Competition and Consumer Policy branch from the Division of International Trade and Commodities in UNCTAD. Indeed, Teresa, thank you for joining us. And I leave now the closing to you. A great pleasure to have you. And for me, just to thank all the speakers, thank all the audience, thank the IT team and the partners and my colleague Marit Nielsen. And with this, Teresa, many thanks, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and good afternoon to everybody, and to Elizabeth and her team and UNECE. Sincere congratulations for a really interesting discussion. I will just talk on one topic, which is the angle of consumer protection, but I was very happy to hear several speakers mentioning this. And so let me just start that the United Nations Guidelines for Consumer Protection are the only multilaterally agreed instrument in this field. And of course, even though it is a non-binding instrument because it's a set of recommendations, it provides valuable guidance for member states to design consumer policies in a broad sense, and also to set up the necessary institutions. The guidelines were adopted in '85 and expanded in '99 to actually include the topic of sustainable consumption, and later revised again in 2015 when UNCTAD was conferred a mandate as the focal point for consumer protection within the United Nations system. So we are the guardians of the guidelines, and we monitor its implementation by member states. I should add that we provide the largest forum to discuss consumer protection issues, since we have 195 member states, and we are very much focused on assisting developing countries. So how do these guidelines and consumer policy, so to speak, relate to this important topic? Well, the objectives of the guidelines include, among other things, the promotion of sustainable consumption and the facilitation of production and distribution patterns that are responsive to the needs and desires of consumers. This means to say that, as other speakers very rightly pointed out, consumer legitimate needs include access to information to enable informed choices according to individual wishes and needs, consumer education, which of course also includes the information related to the environmental, social, and economic consequences of consumer choice, which is extremely important, and the promotion of sustainable consumption patterns. Just allow me to highlight how sustainable consumption is framed in the guidelines, because even though this is from '99, it remains, we believe, very timely. So this is a topic that is seen of shared responsibility between member states, businesses, consumer associations, environmental and other NGOs. And consumers, of course, need to be informed, meaning somehow it is implied that empowered consumers should get information themselves. So I think it's an interesting approach, because it's also focused on our individual responsibility as consumers. Of course, that will depend on access to information, to education, on a number of issues, and even on your social and economic context. But this is a way of underlining that consumers can and should play an active role in the market. So also another important issue is that policy making on this topic should be made in partnership with all relevant stakeholders. So this multi-stakeholder approach, I think, is also very timely and comes a little bit as a takeaway from everything that we heard today, that a combination of instruments and tools are welcome. So of course, rules, but also standards, as we rightly heard, business initiatives, namely self-regulatory measures, which I think are increasingly important and should be encouraged, even though, of course, they never replaced a formal legal framework. The need for further research, methodologies, data to support policy making, planning, and monitoring. I think this was also a trend that several speakers mentioned too. And of course, how governments and international organizations should also take the lead, for instance, in sustainable practices in public procurement. Let me also say that the revised guidelines for consumer protection include, for the first time, a chapter of principles for good business practices, again, encouraging business compliance, self-regulation. Here, again, the standards that are recognized as very important instruments for improved consumer sustainable consumption. Let me tell you also that UNCTAD has developed an interactive instrument, which is the World Consumer Protection Map, which right now covers 103 member states, but of course covering a lot of developing countries. And only 30% of these 103 member states actually have specific provisions in their consumer protection frameworks that mention sustainable consumption. So this shows a little bit that there is room for improvement. First, I would say, as far as laws and policies are concerned, but this also leads to the fact that, of course, sustainability is a cross-cutting issue, and that a shift towards more sustainable production, consumption, and lifestyle requires public policy measures aiming at consumers, but of course also at businesses to adjust production and distribution methods. From UNCTAD's point of view, because of course we deal with trade and development in broad terms, trade of course is very much at the core of the economic recovery from the current pandemic, and it must work for sustainable consumption. So we do see the link between sustainable production and consumption and international trade. We think that trade and markets should work for consumers and for the environment. Of course, it is very important that several speakers mentioned to consider the special needs and challenges faced by developing countries across the world, namely during this still very challenging context, because there is a need of food deficit countries to rely on food imports, and a shift to circularity should not really lead to the reduction in food available in the international markets. How do we go about all of this? Of course, from UNCTAD, like other UN organizations, international cooperation is extremely important. We do see that this multi-stakeholder approach combined with better evidence for policy making and planning, as I mentioned, as far as consumer protection is concerned, namely through behavioral insights to better understand consumer behavior and attitudes and support policy measures, but also try to go into a deeper analysis of a number of labels. Well, we heard about standards. For instance, there is a huge discussion in the consumer protection community on environmental type claims. So we move from the need for consumers to be informed to such a vast range of information that it can be very difficult for consumers to actually make an informed choice. So some balance is needed here, and for this we need to have more, as I said, evidence-based policy making, better research, and hopefully better cooperation. And this is why I think this has been such an interesting event with so many partners from academia, from other international organizations, from the UN family, so to speak, from business also. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I certainly hope we'll have other chances of engaging in this discussion, and especially with our friends from UNICEF, we hope that we will take further our joint work on sustainable consumption. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Teresa, and looking forward to working with you and with colleagues and partners. And I think that concludes our webinar, and I wish everybody a nice afternoon, evening, and continuation of the week. Thank you.